mommies and sea daddies. Welcome back from Thanksgiving. I hope you had a wonderful, relaxing week that wasn't full of fighting with your in-laws. You may notice I'm coming to you on video. I don't want my audio lovers to freak out, okay? My goal here is that I am going to do some video because every time I make one of these podcast episodes, there's so many visuals I want to show you guys because I do a shit ton of research. One metric shit ton. Every time I release a podcast episode of research has been done. And a lot of it's cool, like old photos, old artifact pictures, old newspaper headlines. And I love to share that stuff. And so this is what I was thinking, okay? I want to be able to show you guys stuff, but I also don't want to alienate my audio only podcast listeners because I feel you. I get you, okay? So we're going to go to the boardroom. Because when I do my shows, I've started using PowerPoint presentation, but it's Canva's version of PowerPoint. I use that to organize my show notes, my, the resources I find, all of that, okay? Pictures. And I put that in my little presentation for the week. So what I'm going to do is I am going to play around with doing some video for these episodes so that I can show you my presentation. But here's the thing. If you're an audio listener, that's fine because I'll just put my presentation on my website, deepbluediaries.com, when I publish the episode. So if you just want to kick back and listen or you're on your commute and you can't look, no worries. I'm still going to have everything collected for you in one spot. So just listen and we'll see how that goes, okay? And really quickly, before I get into things, Maggie Creek, I just want to thank you. You're a listener and you've been leaving comments on my podcast episodes. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate your support. Like your comments and that support has really just made my weeks and makes me so happy. Makes all the time I put into it worth it. So thank you, Maggie. Today's episode is one of my favorites so far because I dug up a treasure trove. I love the research process for this podcast because you guys, I go digging deep and I don't want to talk shit. I'm not going to name names. I just feel like a lot of YouTubers and other content creators out there are just relying on recycled stories they find online or even AI. And it just perpetuates shitty fact finding and shitty storytelling. And I don't know, it's an annoyance of mine. So I put a ton of research into my episodes. And I'm not saying that my episodes are always going to be 100% correct and factual, but please know that number one, if I make a false claim or anything like that, like I say, I'm an enthusiast, not an expert. Write me, deepbluediariespod@gmail.com and tell me because I will always make the correction. Okay, so there's that. But also, if I make a mistake, know it was in earnest. Know it was because I just didn't have all the facts but I did the research and it's not because I'm just pulling shit out of my ass like some people. Okay, today we're going to settle a controversy. A big one. And I think we're going to dispel a myth. I know these are big claims, but stick with me. There's been a controversy in the shipwreck community for decades. Probably, that's safe to say. And that controversy is about a song. Yeah, it centers around one little song. You may recognize it.
And so they lived happily together for 300 years in the land of Tir na Nog, land of eternal youth and beauty.
The song is actually a hymn, Nearer My God to Thee. The song is controversial for quite a few reasons. It's controversial in the Titanic community. And the Titanic community, God love you guys. You are passionate about, and I get it. I'm passionate about maritime history. I'm gonna put it out there. I'm a Valencia girl, #Team Valencia, but I still have love for #Team Titanic. but you guys are very passionate. This song is controversial for a few reasons. So, number one, it's been claimed by many survivors of the Titanic that this song was sung as the ship was sinking. Some say it's what the band was playing while the ship was sinking. Others say passengers were singing it. But it's irrefutable that many survivors of the Titanic have mentioned that this hymn was sung or played. Now here's the thing. It's also claimed that 6 years earlier, when the Valencia shipwrecked in 1906, that passengers were singing that same hymn as the ship was, well, the ship didn't really quite sink in the same trajectory as the Titanic. It was a 3-day shit show, but that the doomed passengers were heard singing it. And when I tell you that Team Valencia versus Team Titanic, they'll go round and round about this. Today, we're settling the debate once and for all. Was it the passengers of the Titanic, or was it the passengers of the Valencia that sang Nearer, My God, to Thee as the ships were sinking? Oh yeah, we're solving it. We're putting this to bed, putting it to rest, putting it in Davy Jones's locker. Now, before I delve into the claims of both sides, I have a confession to make. And I want you to stick with me when you hear my reasoning after the confession, because you're going to hear the confession, and I fear it's going to make me lose whatever tiny modicum of legitimacy I've built up with a podcast about maritime history, okay? But there's a good reason, so stick with me. I have never seen the movie Titanic. I know. It's Jess, what the fuck? Listen, it's not like I can't claim I'm 46. It's not like I can claim that I was a child when it came out. No, I was in the prime of my life when that song came out, okay? We were all making out to My Heart Will Go On. I know, I'm a poser. I had no right making out to that song. I didn't see the fucking movie. Listen, this is going to sound crazy to some of you, but for as much as my whole life I have been inexplicably obsessed with maritime history, shipwrecks, anything relating to the ocean, I have been equally scared shitless of large ships sinking. I know, it's the dichotomy of man, it doesn't make sense. I will tell you so much about shipwreck history, but if I see a large ship, I lose my shit. And thinking about it, I'm getting a feeling in the pit of my stomach, okay? When I lived in San Francisco, you would see large cargo ships, right? Coming in, docked, whatever. I wouldn't look. Can't explain it, but a huge ship, especially up close, terrifies the fuck out of me. So you're telling me for 2 hours I have to watch a large ship sink? That is my nightmare fuel. If I had to rank my top 3 fears from least afraid to worst afraid, it would start at the bottom with snake jumping out of the toilet and biting my vagina when I pee, okay? Number 2 is staring out of a window and not realizing that someone is staring back at me from the other side of the window. I know, very specific. And number 3 is big ships. I don't know. And here's the thing. I know I'm going to have to watch the Titanic. I need to. I can't have this podcast and not watch it. So I am going to watch it at some point. My husband keeps pushing me, gently shoving me towards that inevitable day. But there you go. I've never seen the Titanic, but I have researched the shit out of it. So that's fine. It's okay. It's fine. It's like I read the book but didn't watch the movie. Okay. So as most everyone knows, when it comes to the Titanic, we have multiple witnesses accounts that Nearer, My God, to Thee, the hymn, was sung. But there is debate, especially amongst the Titanic enthusiast communities. I've found so many conversations and Reddit threads. Some say that the band wouldn't have played that hymn because it would have been in poor taste. People would have freaked out. What, we're on a ship that's sinking and you're playing fucking hymnals? That's so macabre. So some contend that, okay? Others say that they think that the survivors who say that the band played Nearer, My God, to Thee or passengers sang it, we're getting it confused with another popular song. Especially because there are different versions of that hymn, and they say, well, the British passengers wouldn't have recognized the version of the hymn that the band played, so they must have gotten it confused. Some people point to opposing accounts by others that no hymns were played or sung, and some say it's a myth that was perpetuated by the Valencia, which the myth perpetuated about the Valencia, which was 6 years earlier, is that those doomed passengers were singing the song while they were going through it. So myth begets myth is their argument, okay? So then we get to the Valencia, and I know the Valencia isn't as well known as the Titanic. I did a podcast episode on it, but a very quick recap. The Valencia sunk on January 22nd, 1906 off the west coast of Vancouver Island after it struck a reef during a weather storm. 136 people died and only 37 people survived. And out of those survivors, they were not women and children, but there is reason for that. The men weren't all being scumbags about it. A few were, but not all of them. We'll get into that. But that's the basic gist of the Valencia. Now, when it comes to figuring out, was it the passengers of the Valencia or the Titanic that sang that hymn as their boat was sinking, or did anyone sing it at all? It's not in the Valencia or the Titanic history. It's actually about the history of the song. Now, I'm going to briefly go over it because I'm going to be honest with you, hymns are boring as fuck, okay? I'm getting flashbacks of church on Sunday morning and the pastor being like, everyone turn to page 306. Everyone sings it in off key. Why does everyone scream shout in church when they sing hymns? And there's always one woman in her 80s or 90s who feels like she needs to try and sing in a falsetto voice. It's a shit show, okay? But I'm going to give you the basics because here's the thing. The hymn, the history, and the significance of the hymn in pop culture is actually, to me, the linchpin of figuring out all of this, because holy shit. Nearer My God to Thee was actually first written as a poem, not a hymn. It was written in 1841 by a woman named Sarah Flower Adams. Sarah lived a sad fucking life. She was born in Essex, England in 1805. Her mom died when she was only 5 years old, and not long after that, her sister died of tuberculosis. Sarah would eventually pursue a career in acting, but she herself had some poor health issues later, and so she retired. And after leaving the theater, she decided to spend her time writing poetry and hymnals. And now she was Unitarian in faith, and so a lot of what she wrote was based around her Unitarian faith and biblical stories. She was particularly drawn to the story of Jacob in Genesis, and that is where the poem Nearer My God to Thee came from. When she was done writing these poems, she contributed them to a collection of hymns and anthems being compiled by her pastor, Reverend William Johnston Falk. And while she actually contributed 13 poems to that book, Nearer My God to Thee took the fuck off. People loved it. They went wild. And from there, here's how it progressed. Here's how the song progressed, okay? So she drops the new poem, 1841, all right? In 1856, a guy by the name of Lowell Mason was the first one to put it to a tune and turn it into an actual hymn. He put it to a tune called Bethany, and it was widely adapted outside of the UK. 1861, a man by the name of John Bacchus Dykes put it to the tune of Horbury, and it was associated with peace and comfort, and that was used inside the UK. But here's the thing. I hear people talk all the time about these two songs, the UK version and the American version. You guys, in my research alone, I found over 30 versions of this fucking song, okay? In 1872, a man by the name of Arthur Sullivan, he put it to another tune. 1901, a man by the name of T.C. Gregory put it to another tune. Here's how I want you to think of the Nearer My God to Thee when we're talking about all these different versions, okay? Do you remember the song when you were a little kid, Miss Sally had a steamboat, the steamboat had a bow, Miss Sally went to heaven and the steamboat went to hello, okay, right? How many of you know that song as Miss Mary? How many of you know it as Miss Molly, right? We all learned small little different versions of that song. That being said, when anyone sings it, regardless of the version, we recognize it. We recognize what song they're singing, and we're like, oh, this is a different version. Now, the idea that just because it's to a different tune would make people not remember it, I think is a little silly. It's a little disconnected from the nuance of what that song meant to pop culture at the time, because even though it was set to different tunes and there were a few factions who were unhappy, they were displeased that the original version didn't specifically mention Jesus Christ. So they did add some verses to include Christ, but they didn't change the original ones. The general bones of this song have stayed pretty true regardless of the tune. Now, here are two other significant things to know about this hymn to really put together the puzzle pieces of the Valencia versus the Titanic debate. Number one, this song came from Unitarian roots, which means it was not, again, that religious, which means that it appealed to a wide variety of people. Even if you weren't religious, it was still considered kind of a spiritual song, and it was a comforting song. So it was widely adapted and loved by so many people. Number two, it wasn't a sad song. It was actually a song of comfort. The basic idea of the song, Nearer My God to Thee, is simply that in this time of trial, I find comfort in being closer to my higher power. That is the central idea of the song. It wasn't a sad song meant to say goodbye or seal your fate. It was a song meant to bring comfort like a blankie. Think of it like your comfort blankie. And it was sung across all different types of situations, celebrations, salvations, and yeah, even funerals. I want you to think of this song, the hymn, as the Boys to Men, It's So Hard to Say Goodbye to Yesterday of the late 19th, early 20th century. That's truly what it was. It's a song about reflection and love. And yes, there's loss in there, but it's looked at, it's with the lens of love and acceptance and comfort. One of the most notable examples is President William McKinley. He was assassinated on September 14th, 1901. And literally as he was dying, this was the song that he was not singing. He was speaking the verses. I don't think he could sing very well from the bullet wound, but these were literally his last words were this song because it brought him comfort. It was one of his favorite hymns. And this isn't just significant because it was such a notable event, but it was also significant because this was the Wayne's World Bohemian Rhapsody resurgence of an already popular classic song, right? Everyone loved Bohemian Rhapsody, but when that shit went down in Wayne's World, we saw a brand new resurgence. Everyone was singing it again. People were still parody that scene. Word spread that McKinley was singing this song while he was dying. Same shit happened. Resurgence in popularity. Everyone was singing it again. It became the anthem to sing in a time when you needed comfort, like McKinley did after he was shot. On June 17th, 1872, Massachusetts held its annual Jubilee. 20,000 people were in attendance. The opening song that 20,000 people sang together, Nearer My God to Thee. 1864, a Methodist bishop during the Civil War by the name of Enoch Mather Marvin famously relayed a story where he had been driven from his home by Union troops and was traveling solo through the woods, depressed, despondent, not sure what to do next, and on the verge of giving up. And from that cabin, he heard someone singing, Nearer My God to Thee. He got down from his horse, entered the house, and found an old widow woman singing. And he was struck by the fact that in the midst of poverty he said he had never seen before, this woman was singing a song that was uplifting and comforting. He said his despondency vanished. March 1862, after the Battle of Fort Donelson during the Civil War, corpsmen were going around the battlefield looking for wounded that needed treatment. They discovered a little drummer boy who was mortally wounded but still alive. And as it was reported, the brave boy died before they could carry him off the field, but he kept up a cheerful heart and comforted himself by singing Mrs. Adams' precious hymn, Nearer My God to Thee. And one of my favorites, it's the end of the Samoan Crisis, 1889. U.S. military, the German military, we are in a standoff off the Samoan coast. So basically what had happened is the United States, we had acquired a fueling station. In exchange for this fueling station, we guaranteed protection to Samoa. Like, we got your back, thanks for the fuel, all right? Well, these German motherfuckers came along, and they were like, we want concession from the Samoans. So there we are in a standoff, okay? 3 U.S. warships, 3 German warships, and then what happened? A motherfucking cyclone ripped through, wrecked all 6 ships. All 6. I'm not even kidding. When one of the ships was going down, one of the naval ships, all right? And it looked like they were all going to die. And there was already U.S. military crew who had made it to shore. And they had to watch helplessly as another U.S. naval ship was sinking. All the sailors are on board, climbing up the masts like, fuck, we're sinking. So they didn't know what else to do. So U.S. soldiers on shore started clapping and cheering for their brothers in arms on the U.S. naval ship that was sinking. Those guys started cheering back and started singing Nearer My God to Thee as they were sinking. Why? We learned this because it's a song of comfort. I don't know why I said it like that. Comfort. I did a little ASMR twist. Comfort. But I think you get a clear picture now of this hymn, what it meant at the time, the nuances that were there at the time, how it was regarded. Think of it like the Lord's Prayer. People just fucking said it. Or Hail Mary, whatever your poison is. All right, I want you to think of it like that. So when we go back to the Valencia and the Titanic, think of it in that regard of people arguing over whether or not shipwreck survivors were saying the Lord's Prayer as it sank. But let's go to the Valencia because I want to show you guys what I uncovered while I was researching through some archives. Now, as I said, of the people who survived the Valencia wreck, 37 people, none of them were women and children. And there's a few reasons for this, okay? Number one, when it initially wrecked, it was a fucking nightmare. None of the crew had been trained on how to use the lifeboats. So it was every man for himself, chaos. It was not orderly. And on top of that, the waves and the storm that night were fucking violent. Right? So they're trying to get into these rinky-dink lifeboats, rinky-dink comparatively to a ship in a storm. And they did try to evacuate women and children first, and these women and children were largely lost at sea because the lifeboats were capsizing, they weren't used properly. It was a nightmare. So a lot of them died that way. But over the next few days, as people were trying to get help and signal for help, there were some rescue attempts. But I'm telling you, the sea during this time was so violent that even when large ships like the city of Topeka was one of the ships that tried to, they couldn't get that close. Some say they gave up too fast, but they had a hard time getting close to the wreck because the weather and the waves were fucking terrible, okay? So by the time they were able to get a final life raft near the Valencia and they wanted people to go in it, most of the women refused. They wanted to wait until a bigger boat came along because they had just watched. First of all, they were looking at those waves like, yeah, no, I'm good. And they had also watched all the women and children who had died just a few days earlier in lifeboats on those same waves. So they were like, we're going to wait. The captain, who did go down with his ship, reportedly begged them. He was like, I don't think there's going to be another ship. Get on this lifeboat, please. He was begging them. Now, a few men did try and elbow the women and children out of the rafts before they had a chance to turn it down. But several crew members drew their pistols and were like, back the fuck up. All right. But in the end, most of the women refused to get on that life raft simply because they felt it was too risky. They wanted to wait for a bigger ship to come along. All except two fucking heroic women that, again, this is going to be another episode, its own episode, so I won't go on a tangent. But these women, their stories have been lost in time, and oh my God. I have a crush on two Edwardian women I've never met in my life because they've been dead for over a century. But that's okay. But these women are integral to the did they or didn't they on the Valencia hymn debacle. All right? You ready for this? I feel like where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? Are you ready, gumshoes? Let's do this. I want you to meet Mary Musgrove. Mary was a stewardess on the Valencia, and she had been in the business for over a decade. Like, she knew her shit. Now, she normally worked for a steamship line called Tokyo Kisenkaisha. I hope I pronounced that right. Her regular ship was one called the Nippon Maru. And she was on that ship a lot. And she was awaiting new orders for that ship when a stewardess on the Valencia asked Mary if she could fill in for her because she wasn't feeling very well. She wanted to sit that one out. And Mary agreed because she needed some money for some new clothes. She wanted to get all snazzy before her next assignment on the Nippon Maru. So she agreed to step in for the stewardess on the Valencia. Talk about regretting switching shifts. Mary would go on to be hailed as one of the biggest heroes of the entire Valencia tragedy by the survivors, specifically survivor Walter Raymond. Walter Raymond was another member of the Valencia's crew and one of the few survivors who was rescued in that final life raft. He would go on to describe Mary Musgrove as, quote, the greatest hero on board. He reported that he tried to urge Mary to get into that life raft and take a spot, and she refused, saying, a sailor goes down with their ship. So she chose to stay. She urged him to take her spot on the raft. Raymond reported that he paused for a moment, looking over the ship where he would have to plunge into the icy water to get onto that life raft, okay? To be clear, that life raft was in the water on those waves. It wasn't like it was hoisted on the side of the boat. So he looked over the edge and was like, odd. But Mary saw him hesitate and she said, "Are you gonna go, Walter?" He reports that he nodded his head, and Mary, smiling bravely, opened her lips and started to sing, "Nearer, my God, to thee." As Raymond steadied himself as best he could before leaping onto the rail, he jumped out into the sea towards the tossing raft. He would later tell reporters, quote, "As I went down, 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 the words of that song kept ringing in my ears. I had never sung or spoken to God in my life. It is strange what thoughts a man will have at such a time, but I couldn't help saying to myself, I am nearer to him now than I ever was before. God pity me. It seemed to me that I would never again reach the top of the water. I had just sense enough left not to breathe, and all the time my lungs kept paining until I thought surely they would break. All of a sudden, I popped up into the air, and oh, what a relief it was. Just a moment I floated, content to inhale all the oxygen that I could. I somehow did not seem to realize my position. When I did, I looked for the raft, and it was fully 50 feet from me. I gave up then for the first time since the Valencia struck. I was numb through and through, and I never could have swam that distance, never. But Mary Musgrove's, God rest her, song and prayer must have gone with me. I was lifted by a gigantic wave and fairly hurled through the air. I landed squarely on top of the boys on the raft, and they grabbed me. I knew no more until I found myself being hauled aboard the Topeka. But we're not going to stop there. I don't just come with receipts. I come with CVS receipts, okay? I'm going to tell you about Laura Van Wyck, who, again, is going to be another episode because holy fucking shit, you guys. These stories get lost over time. I'm on my soapbox again. Laura was the other woman hailed as a hero on that entire wreck, and she is one of the other women, besides Mary, who refused to go not because she was scared, but because she wanted to stay and help. She was a society girl in San Francisco, an influencer at the time. She came from a very wealthy family. Her dad was a successful, well-known lawyer, and her mom was also a society lady. 27-year-old Laura was on her way to visit her sister who had just had a baby. When offered a spot on the life raft, she refused. She wanted to hang back, take care of the women and children. It was noted by several survivors that Laura remained calm throughout the entire event, tending to other passengers who were injured and scared, including a little boy who was all alone because his mother had already drowned. And here's what I particularly want you to pay attention to. This article about Laura, dated January 30th, 1906, from the San Francisco Call. The men are full of accounts of Laura's bravery. They called her the girl with the gray coat and told how she and the stewardess cheered up all of the people. She and a stewardess. Mary Musgrove and Laura Van Wyck had joined forces and were the self-appointed women who were taking care of those who weren't doing as well. It was reported that Laura and a, quote, another woman, presumably Mary, led the other passengers in singing hymns throughout the ordeal, including Nearer, My God, to Thee. The Kentucky State Register ran a huge piece on Laura Van Wyck at the time because her family, though in San Francisco, was originally from Kentucky, and she still had a ton of very high-profile family in Kentucky, including a few state judges. They actually spoke to one of the survivors. P.V. O'Brien was his name, and P.V. O'Brien told him that in the darkness of the blinding storm, the few survivors clinging to the wreck huddled close together, and Laura led them in singing hymns, including Rock of Ages Cleft for Me, Jesus Lover of My Soul, and Nearer, My God, to Thee. O'Brien says that he remembered Laura singing all the hymns because she had a rich, strong contralto voice, and it was natural he would recall it. He remembered Laura's calm and unfaltering expression that never left her to the last. Her calm, beautiful, brave expression cheered him whenever he looked at her. And finally, back to the Titanic. Listen, I know that the Titanic has been studied to death. It's been examined to death. And I'm going to be honest, a lot of what I find people reciting about their recollections of what was sung, what wasn't sung, who said what, much of the reference material has been the same reference material we've been looking at for decades. And that's not to discredit that reference material, but sometimes it's good to also dig a little deeper to see what other little grains of truth, little nuances that we can find. I dug up 100 issues of the publication called London Illustrated. It was a big publication in England at the time of the Titanic sinking, and there was, as you can imagine, a ton of investigative journalism within those pages. And I want to call out a few key things that I found. In regards to the notion that there's so many different versions of Nearer My God to Thee, there's the English version, there's the American version, who knows what sung what, I found this interesting. The Daily Graphic notices the unanimous antipathy to anything English shown by our singers. English singers prefer a foreign tongue. Friends of Mr. Wallace Hartley, bandmaster of the Titanic, are convinced that it was Sullivan's tune to Nearer My God to Thee that was played as the ship sank. This setting, a favorite with him, was sung at Mr. Hartley's funeral. Another article, the writer was told by one of the few saved from the wreck of the Titanic that the tune of Nearer My God to Thee, which was played while the vessel was sinking, was the one composed by Sir Arthur Sullivan. And my favorite, one of the most dramatic incidences of the great shipwreck was the heroic conduct of the band, which, led by Mr. W. Hartley of Dewsbury, continued to play up to a few minutes of the end. On this subject, as with others connected with the disaster, there have been conflicting statements, but of the main fact, there is no doubt. In its careful summary of the various reports, the Times said, quote, that the band played as bravely as that other band in the Birkenhead during a great part of the time that the Titanic was sinking seems indisputable. Nearer My God to Thee and other hymn tunes were, as reported, played for some time. Then the music changed to something lighter, which would explain the statements about ragtime, and continued until about 10 minutes before the end. As they played, the bandsmen were said to have tried to fix on life belts. It may well be indeed that it was not until they were flooded out that they gave up their heroic and self-appointed task. I find this the most compelling because it wasn't just one hymn that seems to have been played on the Titanic. It was multiple hymns that were played on the Titanic. Of course, the band would play some hymns at a time like that. It seems they played hymns for a little while and then they switched it up to something a little more lighthearted. And if they were playing hymns at that time, Nearer My God to Thee, the ultimate Bohemian Rhapsody of hymns of the time, would absolutely have been played. And regardless of the version, the bones of the song are still the same. People would still recognize it. And yes, some of the survivors claim they never heard that song, but it was a shipwreck. Things were sinking. People were going down. There was a lot of chaos going on. There were probably a lot of things they didn't hear. You mean to tell me that those survivors remembered every single song that was playing throughout the night that the ship was sinking? Of course not. And putting aside the fact that so many survivors said time and time again that there were multiple hymns played throughout the night, and knowing what we know, that Nearer My God to Thee would have been on everyone's Spotify Wrapped list, I'm going to say when it comes to the debate, was it the Valencia or the Titanic that sang Nearer My God to Thee as the ship was sinking? The answer is yes. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jess. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jess. While I do spout fictional nonsense about the sea on my social media channels for entertainment purposes, I do put a lot of research into my podcast episodes. That being said, I'm an enthusiast, not an expert. If you are an expert, I welcome additional commentary or corrections. You can email me at deepbluediariespod@gmail.com. All sources, social media links will be linked in the show notes. Till next time, bye.